The story begins in the bitter cold of December, where winter storms smothered the Ardennes in fog and shadows. Snow piled on pine branches like silent warnings, and the wind carried a cold whisper of something terrible moving in the dark. The American front was stretched thin, underestimating what the enemy still had left. Commanders believed the war was nearing its end, that the German army was finished, and that victory was only months away. But beneath the forests of Belgium, the enemy marshaled a counterattack so violent and unexpected that it shattered every assumption the Allies held. Reports started arriving in headquarters that German armor was punching through weak points, sweeping past frozen roadblocks, and surrounding entire American divisions before they even realized they were under attack. No one expected this. No one saw the scale of it coming. At 1st Army headquarters, General Courtney Hodges tried to hold the line, but chaos was growing faster than information could be processed. Communications were shutting down. Units were disappearing from the map. Columns of refugees clogged the roads, slowing movements to a crawl. And at the center of this unfolding disaster lay a strategic town the Germans desperately wanted to capture, Bastogne. It was a crossroads, a hub, a critical choke point. Whoever held Bastogne controlled the roads needed for the German offensive to reach deeper into Belgium. And inside that town was the 101st Airborne Division, along with several armor and artillery elements, completely surrounded by enemy forces. They were cut off, freezing, low on supplies, and holding a defensive perimeter that shrank by the hour. When word of the encirclement reached Allied high command, tension snapped through the room like a wire pulling taut. Senior commanders understood the implications immediately. If Bastogne fell, the German spearhead could punch through unopposed. Hodges could not relieve them. The First Army was collapsing. The skis were frozen over with blizzards so thick that even the most experienced pilots refused to take off. The burden of relief could only fall to one commander, one who was not even facing that direction. General George S. Patton. His Third Army was engaged to the south, pushing eastward, already locked in its own operations. It made no strategic sense to turn his entire army 90 degrees in the dead of winter, redirect tens of thousands of men, hundreds of tanks, mountains of artillery, and mountains of fuel through icy mountain roads. At SHAEF headquarters, General Omar Bradley listened as the situation was explained to the Supreme Commander, General Eisenhower. Maps covered the table. Red arrows showed enemy breakthroughs. Circles marked trapped American divisions. Officers murmured grimly, their faces pale under the harsh lights. Bradley leaned forward, absorbing every detail. He was not a man easily shaken, but even he could feel the urgency settling like lead in the room. When Eisenhower asked what could be done, the room fell silent. No commander wanted to suggest something reckless. Everyone feared the weight of responsibility. Finally, Eisenhower turned to Bradley, asking him which commander could reach Bastogne in time. Bradley exhaled slowly and said the name that everyone knew, but few dared to speak: Patton. At that very moment, Patton was already preparing for something no one expected. Earlier, he had received fragments of intelligence that indicated something big was happening in the Ardennes. He saw the pattern before most. He sensed the Germans were unleashing a last desperate blow. And so he had quietly ordered his staff to prepare contingency plans, not one but several, for a complete shift of his army to the north. His staff thought it was madness, but Patton insisted. When Bradley summoned him to Verdun to discuss the crisis, Patton walked into the meeting already knowing exactly what needed to be done. The tension in the room was thick when Eisenhower asked Patton how soon he could turn his entire army north to relieve Bastogne. Many officers expected him to say a week or more. Even days seemed optimistic. The roads were frozen. The men were exhausted. Supplies were limited. The idea of moving an entire army group through narrow, snow-choked roads under winter storms felt insane. But Patton did not hesitate. He said he could attack in 48 hours. The room erupted. Officers stared at him in disbelief, some smiling, others scoffing. Bradley's eyebrows lifted sharply, surprised but not entirely shocked. He knew Patton was bold, but this was beyond bold. This was impossible. Yet Patton wasn't joking. He explained that he had already prepared the plans, already issued warning orders to his divisions, and already set the wheels of movement in motion. Bradley watched him with a mixture of admiration and concern. Patton's audacity was legendary, but this operation would test even his limits. Bradley stepped aside with him after the meeting, lowering his voice as he told him that the fate of the 101st Airborne, some of the finest soldiers America had, now depended on him. Patton nodded, not with arrogance but with a firm sense of duty. He told Bradley he would reach them. He would break the siege, no matter the cost. As soon as Patton returned to his headquarters, movement orders were confirmed. Engines roared to life in the freezing night. Columns of tanks, half-tracks, trucks, fuel carriers, and artillery pieces began crawling toward the north. Snow fell heavily, turning roads into sheets of ice. Soldiers wrapped themselves in blankets, shivering as they rode in open trucks. Military police stood at crossroads, directing endless streams of vehicles in bitter winds. Villagers awoke to the thunder of armored columns rolling through their towns at midnight. The Third Army's march north was not simply a maneuver, it was a miracle of logistics and willpower. One of the divisions chosen to lead the push toward Bastogne was the 4th Armored Division, commanded by the aggressive and fearless General Hugh Gaffey. Under him, men like Colonel Creighton Abrams spearheaded the advance. Abrams, tankers had a reputation for pushing forward no matter how hard the resistance. But now they faced a brutal challenge, advancing through dense forests, narrow roads, and enemy strongpoints fortified with anti-tank guns and machine guns, all while dealing with blizzards that made visibility nearly zero. Every mile was a battle. Every village was a fortress. Casualties mounted, but the Third Army pushed on relentlessly. Inside Bastogne, the 101st Airborne endured a nightmare of cold, hunger, and constant shelling. They held their lines with dwindling ammunition, their uniforms frozen stiff, their boots soaked through with snow. Medical supplies ran desperately low. Wounded soldiers lay in makeshift aid stations, praying for evacuation that never came. Yet the defenders held firm. When the German commander demanded surrender, Brigadier General Anthony McAuliffe famously replied, "Nuts!" The reply spread through the town like a spark, lifting morale even as conditions grew worse. But the soldiers knew defiance alone would not save them. Relief had to come from outside, and the only commander marching toward them was Patton. As the days passed, weather improved slightly, allowing Allied aircraft to drop supplies into the town. The defenders cheered as crates of ammunition, rations, blankets, and medicine descended through the sky under white parachutes. But air drops alone couldn't break the encirclement. It had to be done on the ground, tank by tank, rifle by rifle. At Bradley's headquarters, updates arrived constantly. Bradley paced slowly, listening as officers briefed him on Patton's progress. He respected Patton deeply, but he also understood that the stakes were higher than anything they had faced before. Bradley needed him to break through. He needed the 101st rescued. He needed something to turn the tide of the Ardennes. And every night, as reports came in, Bradley could feel the weight of this operation settling heavier on his shoulders. He hoped Patton's promise would hold. By December 26th, the spearhead of the 4th Armored Division reached the outskirts of Bastogne. German defenders fought desperately to stop them. Anti-tank guns fired from hidden positions. Mortar shells rained down. Infantry ambushed from forest edges. American tanks burned in the snow, glowing orange against the icy ground. But Abrams refused to stop. He reorganized his forces under fire, pushing forward in small, aggressive strikes, each one clawing closer to the trapped town. Then it happened. One of Abrams' tanks broke through the final German roadblock. As the tank rumbled forward, soldiers of the 101st Airborne spotted the star painted on its armor. They burst into cheers. Some wept. Others laughed with exhaustion. The siege was broken. Bastogne was relieved. The 101st was saved. Word traveled fast, from Bastogne to the field command posts, from the command posts to the Corps headquarters, and finally up to Bradley. When Bradley received the message confirming the breakthrough, he stood silently for a moment, letting the relief wash over him. Officers in the room looked at him, waiting for his reaction. Bradley was not a man prone to dramatic outbursts, but this moment shook him. He said that Patton had performed one of the most remarkable maneuvers in the history of American arms. He said no other commander could have turned an entire army 90 degrees in winter, marched through ice and snow, and smashed through enemy lines to rescue a trapped division. He said Patton had saved not only the 101st Airborne, but the entire Allied position in the Ardennes. Later that evening, Bradley spoke privately with his staff. He reflected on how Patton's speed, audacity, and relentless drive had transformed a looming catastrophe into a turning point. He admitted that Patton had exceeded every expectation placed on him. He said Patton's leadership had restored momentum to the Allied campaign when it needed it most. And with a rare tone of admiration, Bradley said that Patton's relief of Bastogne would be remembered long after the war was over. On the front lines, soldiers of the 101st met the 3rd Army troops with smiles, jokes, and the tired satisfaction of men who had stared death in the face and survived. Many of them didn't fully grasp the scale of what Patton had done. They only knew that tanks with white stars had come roaring through the snow at the last possible moment. They learned later that the entire operation had been one of the greatest feats of mobility in modern warfare. They learned that their rescue had been anything but certain, and they learned that Bradley himself had praised Patton's actions with a respect that few commanders ever received. In the aftermath, Patton's men continued to fight east of Bastogne, pushing back German forces and helping collapse the Ardennes offensive. Bradley continued to oversee the broader campaign, now reinforced by the knowledge that crisis had been averted. Eisenhower recognized the relief of Bastogne as a turning point, and historians would later write that Patton's maneuver was so bold and so fast that it redefined what an army could accomplish under pressure. But Bradley's words remain the clearest reflection of the moment. He said Patton had done the impossible, that he had saved an entire division and stabilized the entire front. He said the relief of Bastogne was Patton at his very best, aggressive, unstoppable, and utterly fearless. And in that winter, in the frozen forests of Belgium, that was exactly what the Allies needed. Thanks for watching.